Hey everyone, your storyteller Jake here. I hope you have a great night and are ready to sleep to this story. Let us begin. Whispers in the fog. The fog had a weight to it, thick and unmoving, like damp wool draped over the coast. Clara sat stiffly in the passenger seat of the battered transport van as it rumbled along the winding road, the driver humming off-key to some old folk tune that crackled through the static of the dashboard radio. They hadn't spoken much since leaving the ferry landing 2 hours earlier. The driver, Edwin, she thought his name was, only answered in grunts or vague shrugs when she tried to make conversation. But Clara did impress him. She'd come for solitude. And science. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. Outside the window, the trees turned from pine to low, moss-covered shrubs. The road dipped and curved, and soon the sea emerged like a secret, gray, vast, and barely distinguishable from the sky. Fog rolled over the dunes, trailing long, ghostly tendrils that reached for the road. "You sure this is where you want off?" Edwin asked suddenly, his voice gravel-thick. Clara blinked. The van had stopped. Through the windshield, she could just make out a narrow gravel lane that cut between low hedges and disappeared into the mist. A crooked sign stood beside it, barely legible in the gloom. Selcroft Research Station, EST 1891. "This is it," Clara said, reaching for her duffel bag and the box of sample containers. Edwin didn't help unload. He stayed behind the wheel, engine idling, eyes never leaving the fog. "You'll want to keep your windows locked at night," he muttered as she shut the van's rear door. She paused. "Excuse me?" But Edwin just gave a small nod, threw the van into gear, and drove off without another word. The tires kicked up pebbles as they vanished into the mist, the red taillights swallowed by gray. Clara stood alone on the lane, the heavy air clinging to her like wet skin. Then she heard it. A whisper. Faint, fleeting, almost imagined. "Clara!" She spun around, scanning the trees and brush. Nothing. Only fog and silence. She shook her head. Jet lag. Nerves. Shouldering her bag, she started down the gravel path toward the station. The gravel lane curved through stands of scrub alder before rising to a low bluff, where the fog thinned just enough for Clara to glimpse weather-worn clapboard buildings crouched against the sky. Selcroft Research Station was smaller than she'd imagined, 3 main structures stitched together by covered walkways, the paint on every wall blistered by salt. A narrow lighthouse towered behind them, its lantern room dark, glass panes streaked white with gold droppings. The tower looked abandoned, yet the station grounds were tidy, pathways swept, rope railings mended, porch lights glowing like watchful eyes in the murk. A figure emerged from one doorway, a tall woman in a yellow slicker, her gray hair coiled beneath a knit cap. She raised a hand. "Dr. Ashe?" the woman called. Clara lifted her duffel in response. "Yes, Clara Ashe. You must be Director Halden." The woman strode forward, boots crunching on gravel. Her handshake was firm, her palms strangely warm despite the chill. "Lydia Halden. Welcome to Selcroft. We're glad someone finally accepted the jellyfish assignment." Clara smiled. "I couldn't pass up the chance to study a persistent bloom in situ. Besides, I've always liked fog." Lydia's expression tightened, as though Clara had praised a venomous snake. "It isn't fond of strangers," she said. "Come inside before it closes in again." The main building smelled of cedar and iodine. Lydia guided Clara past the cramped laboratory, benches stacked with glass jars holding pale, gelatinous creatures, into an office lined with nautical charts. A kettle whistled on a portable stove. "Tea?" Lydia asked. "Yes, thank you." Clara set her sample box on a desk. "You run the station alone?" "Mostly. A caretaker, Jonah, handles the lighthouse generators. The others left." Lydia poured steaming liquid into enamel cups. "Fog got to them." Clara raised an eyebrow. "The fog?" Lydia stared over the rim of her cup. "You'll hear stories. Fishermen speak of voices, shapes, moving in the surf. Some call it sea smoke spirits. Superstition sticks here like salt on the windows. Best not to dwell on it. Clara sipped her tea. I study ecosystems, not ghosts. That's what Dr. Meyer said. Lydia's gaze drifted to an empty coat hook by the door. He vanished 3 winters ago during a storm. Went out for specimens, never returned. Fog rolled in and she pinched her fingers together, dusting off an imaginary particle. Gone. Silence stretched between them, thick as clouds outside. Lydia broke it with brisk efficiency. Your quarters are through the south wing. Supper's at 7. Afterward I'll show you the pier and sample cages. Tide's out at dawn, best time to collect. Clara unpacked in a Spartan room, single bed, metal desk, oval window facing the sea. Fog pressed against the glass like damp cotton. She placed Helen Spear's Coastal Medusa on the desk, then set up her recorder for field notes. 14 April, 1810 hours, she dictated. Arrival uneventful. Station smaller than expected, staff minimal. Locals attribute disappearances to fog, likely hypothermia, disorientation. Will verify oceanographic data tomorrow. A soft knock interrupted her. She opened the door to find no one, only the hallway light flickering. On the floor lay a shell, spiraled, iridescent, still wet. She bent to pick it up. A whisper coiled through the corridor, brushing her ear. Hide before dark. She spun, hard hammering. Empty hall, closed doors. When she straightened, the shell was gone, leaving only a damp circle on the wooden plank. Outside, the foghorn sounded, a low, mournful note that trembled through walls and bone alike. Supper smelled of fish stew, but Clara's appetite had vanished, chased away by a question forming at the back of her mind. If the fog could swallow an ocean-trained doctor, what might it want with her? She slipped the silver shell print bookmark into her journal, listening to the distant horn, and told herself Lydia's stories were only warnings. Yet as the lighthouse lamp remained dark against the swirling gray, Clara Ashe felt, perhaps for the first time in her careful, rational life, the sea was watching. Clara woke before dawn, her breath fogging in the chilled room. The foghorn had moaned twice during the night, long, distant calls that vibrated the windows but never roused the rest of the station. She pulled on her fleece, then her windbreaker, and clipped her sampling kit to her belt. A note from Lydia was slid under the door. Low tide. Pier unlocked. Collect from cage number 4. Mind the rope ladder. L. Clara stepped into the hallway, quiet but for the distant whisper of surf and the occasional pop of the old heating pipes. The station felt like it had been asleep for decades, woken only recently. Outside, fog swirled at knee height, the kind that moved against the wind. The air carried that unmistakable sea scent, salt, decay, brine, and something faintly sweet, like wet violets. The pier stretched like an arm over slate-colored rocks below. Clara walked slowly, boots echoing on the damp planks. The water beneath was unusually still. The cages dangled from thick chains into the shallows. She reached cage number 4, a rectangular frame covered in barnacle clusters and kelp, and began to haul it up, hand over hand. Each tug brought up more resistance, until finally, with a wet thunk, the cage broke the surface. Inside, a pale blue shimmer blinked under the mesh. She squinted closer. Jellyfish. Dozens of them. Pelagia noctiluca, if her guess was right, though their coloring was strange, almost silver. And some were pulsing faintly even out of water. Clara reached for a specimen vial, speaking into her recorder. 4:58 a.m. cage number 4, specimens retrieved. Unusual pigmentation. Bioluminescent response observed. Possible environmental trigger. Samples secured. Then something moved behind her. She spun around. Only fog. A deep groan echoed out of the sea, not a foghorn, not machinery. It sounded alive, like the exhale of something massive just below the surface. The sound faded, but her pulse stayed high. She collected the jellyfish and hurried back toward the lab, eyes flicking to every shadow between the buildings. Lydia was already in the lab, hunching over her desk and charting tidal fluctuations. She glanced at the sloshing bucket in Clara's hands. "Good haul?" she asked. Clara nodded, peeling back her gloves. "Yes, but I heard something. Something in the water." Lydia didn't react. Just kept writing. "You'll hear things," she said eventually. "The fog carries sound in strange ways." Clara hesitated. It felt too close. "And there's something odd about their bioluminescence. I've never seen this species pulse so consistently in open air." Lydia's pen paused. "It's why Meyer stayed longer than he should have. Obsessed with them. Thought they weren't from here at all." Clara arched a brow. "You mean invasive?" Lydia finally looked up. "I mean not from anywhere." Later, Clara examined the specimens under microscope. Their stinging cells looked wrong. Overdeveloped. Structured. Almost like designed. She opened Meyer's logbooks. Most entries were academic. Charts, dates, salinity levels. But one stood out, scrawled in the margin of a water quality report. "They hum when no one is looking. It's a language. Or a warning." Clara stared at the sentence. Then, just beneath it, written in different ink, "They remember things." Outside the lab, the fog began to rise again. And from far out beyond the reef, the low groan returned. This time, it answered something deeper. The fog never lifted that afternoon. Instead, it thickened into something almost opaque. From the lab window, Clara could barely see the path between buildings. The sea itself had vanished behind curtains of gray. She spread Meyer's journals across the work table, brushing aside the older tide charts and fish counts. A loose page slipped from between the covers, something different. A hand-drawn map. The shoreline was crudely rendered, marked with notes in tight, frantic handwriting. "They don't come past the stones. Voice is strongest here. Do not walk below the lighthouse." At the very bottom corner, one word was circled twice. "Lantern Clara frowned. It wasn't on any official charts. She cross-referenced it with the coastal map mounted beside the desk. No mention. And yet Meyer had sketched it like a hidden cove. A place he didn't want to forget. Or maybe one no one else should find. She ran her finger across the page. The ink had bled slightly, like it had gotten wet. Later, at dinner, Lydia barely touched her food. She sat stiffly at the head of the table, the radio turned low beside her, playing static instead of music. Clara cleared her throat. "Do you know a place called Lantern?" The spoon froze halfway to Lydia's mouth. Then she set it down with a quiet clink. "That place doesn't exist." Clara reached into her jacket and slid Meyer's map across the table. Lydia's face didn't change, but her voice dropped. "He found that in the lighthouse. Old charting room in the lower level. I told him to stay out. He didn't listen." "What's there?" Lydia stood abruptly. "We don't go below the tower. We leave the fog alone." She left her half-finished bowl on the table and walked out without another word. Clara waited until night to visit the lighthouse. The wind had picked up slightly, the air salted with the sharp tang of brine and something more metallic. Her flashlight barely pierced the fog as she approached the tower. The door creaked open at her touch, unlocked. Inside, dust and cobwebs draped everything. Old lantern lenses lay shattered in boxes. A thick spiral staircase curled upward into shadow, and downward into deeper dark. She descended. The lower room was circular, and smelled of rust and mildew. On one wall, ancient maps were nailed up, their edges curled. On a small bench lay a field notebook, Meyer's. She opened it. Most of the pages were blank, except one, written in large, slanted script. "The fog listens. Don't speak your name out loud after dark. If it calls you by name, don't answer. And never, ever look for the voice." Clara stepped back. A whisper brushed her neck. This time, not in her head. Not imagination. It came from the far side of the room, near the shattered window. "Clara!" She froze. "Come to the shore." She raised her flashlight. Nothing. But the fog inside the room was moving. It curled like fingers reaching across the stone. She fled. Up the stairs, through the tower door, across the gravel, until the lab's porch light swallowed her whole. She didn't stop shaking until morning. Clara didn't tell Lydia what she'd found in the lighthouse basement. Not about the whisper. Not about the fog that moved. She didn't even mention the notebook still stuffed in her jacket pocket. The next morning, she descended the cliffside path behind the station, following the route on Meyer's hidden map. The fog clung low along the shoreline, curling like breath across the rocks. She found it where he said it would be, a narrow trail half buried in dune grass, leading down to a crescent-shaped beach, nearly invisible from above. Lantern Fall. It was silent here. The kind of silence that vibrated in your teeth. Seaweed draped over black stone like wet flags. Driftwood jutted from the sand in broken rows. And there, half buried at the tidal-line, lay something metallic. A rusted trap cage. She approached carefully, boots squelching through the sand. The cage was collapsed on one side. Torn. Inside, a jellyfish the size of a soccer ball blinked with faint blue pulses. Clara crouched. "How did you get out here?" It didn't react. But as she leaned closer, she noticed something. Its tendrils were looped in tight, complex patterns. Not tangled. Braided. She reached for her specimen jar. Then a wave of nausea slammed into her. Clara staggered back, the world spinning. A whisper rose from the sand. Not from the sea. Too late. She turned. No one there. But something was wrong. The footprints. She looked down at her own trail, and realized it was the only one. Except for one set. Tiny. Bare. And leading back toward the lighthouse. Back at the station, Lydia was in the kitchen, polishing silverware. Clara tossed the map on the table. "You knew about the beach. About the cage. About the voices." Lydia didn't look up. "I told you not to go." Clara paced, angry now. "There's something intelligent in the water. Something communicating. I found jellyfish moving their tendrils in deliberate loops. That's not normal. Meyer knew, didn't he? That's why he stayed." Lydia set the silver spoon down carefully. "He thought they were remembering. That the jellyfish and the fog were part of the same thing. Not separate." She turned, her voice low. "You can't study the fog like it's a specimen in a tank, Clara. It's not interested in being watched." "Then what does it want?" Lydia paused. "It wants to be remembered." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The foghorn didn't sound. The wind didn't blow. She sat at her desk, staring at Meyer's field notes. The last entry, hastily scribbled. "The lighthouse sees more than light. The fog doesn't end at the water." Then below it, in darker ink, "She's in it. The girl." Still whispering. Still playing. Clara looked toward the oval window. Outside, the fog shifted gently. And in its depths, a girl's silhouette stood still, watching. Clara didn't remember walking outside. She only knew that by the time the door clicked shut behind her, she was already halfway across the gravel yard, boots crunching softly. The fog lay thick as wool. A damp wind moved across her cheeks, but the air was otherwise still, too still. The girl hadn't moved. She stood by the edge of the trees near the lighthouse, facing Clara. Pale, barefoot, her dark dress hanging like silk linen, clinging to her thin frame. She looked no older than 10, hair stringy and motionless, untouched by breeze. "Hello?" Clara called gently. "Are you lost?" No answer. The girl only tilted her head. Slowly. The movement was bird-like, too controlled. Clara took a cautious step forward. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to help." The girl's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. Another step. Then, without warning, the girl turned and walked into the fog. Clara broke into a run. "Wait! Stop!" The mist closed around her like a curtain, swallowing the girl instantly. Clara chased the fading shape through the trees, branches clawing at her sleeves. And then, Silence. The girl was gone. The lighthouse loomed up beside her, gray, crooked, its windows black as a blind eye. Clara stopped, chest heaving. Something about the air here felt wrong. Denser. Like the pressure just before a storm breaks. She turned back toward the trail. And froze. There were no footsteps behind her. Only hers. No impressions from the girl. Just her own desperate chase stamped in soft dirt. She wasn't real. Or worse, she wasn't just a girl. Inside, Lydia met her at the door. "Where did you go?" she demanded, voice sharper than usual. "There was a child outside. By the trees." Lydia's face paled. "You saw her?" Clara nodded slowly. "You know who she is?" Lydia hesitated, then lowered her voice. "We don't say her name. We never did. She drowned here in 1913, fell from the lighthouse during a storm. They say the fog came the next day and never left." Clara felt cold creep down her spine. "But I saw her. She was real. Solid. She's a memory," Lydia whispered. "A part of the fog now. It holds things. Remembers them. But it's not like us. It doesn't forget. And it doesn't let go." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. The girl's face lingered behind her eyelids, eyes wide and silent, mouth moving with some unspoken thought. She turned over in bed and nearly screamed. A shell lay on the pillow beside her. Same as the one from the hall days ago. Same spiral. Same dampness. She grabbed it. It was warm. As she held it to her ear, expecting the rush of ocean noise, she heard whispering. "You're almost there." She dropped it. It rolled off the bed and disappeared beneath the frame. She didn't pick it up. Clara rose before dawn again, compelled by something beyond her usual discipline. The fog outside was thick and unmoving, a wall of swirling silver that blunted all sound. She dressed in silence, the memory of the shell's whisper still clinging like sea salt to her skin. She did not speak of it to Lydia. Instead, she walked to the lab and retrieved one of Meyer's preserved jellyfish specimens, suspended in a jar of formalin. It was still glowing faintly. She didn't remember them doing that before. She dimmed the lights, hoping it was just residual bioluminescence, but the glow remained steady. Pulsing. Rhythmic. A code? She sat down and played the recordings from her earlier field notes, listening for patterns. After a few minutes, her ears caught something strange buried under the hum of the environment. Not the usual static, not ocean currents. A voice. Faint. Echoing. She turned up the volume. "Listen." It was like someone speaking underwater. She rewound. Played it again. Same word. Then another. "Hear me." It wasn't just the fog whispering anymore. The ocean was trying to talk. Clara brought the discovery to Lydia at breakfast. She played the recording. Watched her carefully. Lydia stirred her tea unfazed. "I heard it too once," she said quietly. "The fog and the water, they overlap. Like breath and memory. But it's not meant for you." "Then who is it for?" Lydia didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Clara climbed the lighthouse again. She stepped carefully past the old rusted steps, her flashlight beam darting like a moth in the gloom. At the top, she found the lantern room sealed in dust. She cleared grime from the windows and stared out toward the horizon. Nothing. Just fog, breathing in and out like a living thing. Then she noticed something strange etched into the glass. Barely visible unless the light hit it just so. Handwriting. Fingertips smudged words. "She waits where light no longer reaches." Clara touched the glass. It was cold, but not with temperature, cold like absence. Cold like something had touched it that didn't belong in this world anymore. That evening, Lydia finally told her the rest of the story. There was a keeper. He lived here when the girl drowned. Some say she fell. Some say she jumped. But a few claimed they saw her pulled. Pulled by what? The fog. Or the sea. Or something in between. Lydia paused. They found his journals. Pages missing. The rest filled with circles. Spirals. Shells. He stopped lighting the beacon. Said it blinded her eyes beneath the tide. They locked him in a sanatorium. But he was smiling when they took him. Smiling? Lydia nodded. Like he was going home. That night, Clara dreamed of drowning. Not falling, but sinking. Through water so dense it burned her eyes. Through layers of memories that were not hers. Until, far below, she saw the girl again. Waiting. Reaching. And when Clara woke, choking on nothing, she was holding another shell in her hand. This one wasn't warm. It was ice cold. Clara couldn't shake the dream. The girl beneath the tide, the reaching hand, the cold that sank past her bones, none of it faded like normal dreams did. It stayed with her, coiled like seaweed around her thoughts. She didn't tell Lydia about the shell in her hand when she woke. She wrapped it in a napkin and hid it inside her desk drawer. Then she returned to the lighthouse. Not to the top this time. She had noticed a locked door halfway up the staircase, a narrow one with an old iron latch, rusted shut. It hadn't caught her attention at first, but now it gnawed at her like a missing piece in a puzzle. She brought a pry bar from the tool shed. It only took one good heave for the latch to break. Inside was a small room. Dusty. Claustrophobic. A desk, a cot, a chair pressed beneath a tiny round window crusted with sea salt. The smell hit her instantly. Salt, mildew, and something else. Old smoke? She turned her flashlight slowly. The walls were covered in drawings. Hundreds of them. Drawn in charcoal, some barely visible now. Spirals. Circles. Shells. Eyes. Eyes watching from the fog. Eyes glowing beneath the sea. On the desk lay a small book. The keeper's journal. She picked it up and opened to a random page. She talks through the water now. I can't light the beacon anymore. It hurts her. Another page. She told me her name. It's mine now, too. That's how it works. Clara frowned. On the next page, one word was scrawled again and again, growing more frantic. Lanterfall. And beneath that, don't forget. Don't forget. Don't forget. Outside, the foghorn wailed once, low, mournful. Then again. But this time, it was answered. Far off. Another horn. Deeper. Slower. Then another. And another. All from the sea. That evening, Clara spread the keeper's pages across the lab table. She began to piece together a timeline. Dated entries. Locations. Notes. Many centered on Lanterfall, always marked with strange symbols. Like language, but not one she recognized. She compared them to the jellyfish tendril loops. A match. Not exact. But similar enough to make her stomach tighten. What if the fog wasn't just weather? What if it was a vessel? A language? An intelligence? Her hands trembled as she traced the shell-like spiral on one of the drawings. The moment her finger completed the curve, her vision blurred. The lab walls seemed to shift. The air pressed close. Then, Clara! She turned. Lydia stood in the doorway. But her eyes weren't quite right. Too wide. Too still. Her voice was flat. You shouldn't read that. Clara swallowed. Why not? Lydia stepped into the room. Because she's starting to remember you, too. Clara stared at Lydia, heart pounding. The lab lights hummed overhead, but everything felt dim, flattened, like she was inside a photograph slowly fading at the edges. What do you mean, she remembers me? Clara asked. Lydia's posture stiffened, but her eyes didn't blink. Not once. You opened the door. You looked. She knows your voice now. And your shape. That's how she learns. Clara backed away from the table, still gripping the keeper's journal. Who is she? Lydia tilted her head, just slightly, an uncanny echo of the girl's gesture in the fog. Her smile was thin, unpracticed. Not quite right. She's always been here. Before ships. before stories, before memory. She just needed someone to speak her name again. The door slammed shut behind Clara, though no one touched it. She bolted for the side exit, bursting into the fog-heavy night. The air outside was thick with salt and cold, almost gritty. She ran without a flashlight, feet slipping on wet stone, until she reached the trail to Lanternfall. The map, the drawings, the journals, everything pointed to this place. As she descended, the sea opened before her, flat and reflective like black glass. The moon was hidden, but some inner glow danced along the water's edge. Tendrils of fog swirled in unnatural patterns, curling and folding as if directed by invisible hands. She reached the crescent beach, heart hammering. The tide was out, exposing something. A structure, rising like broken ribs from the sand, the remains of a pier, or a gate. Coral-encrusted stone pillars etched with ancient spirals. The fog didn't pass between them. It stopped, as if held back by an invisible barrier. She stepped closer. In the center, at the lowest tide mark, was a depression in the sand. A pool. Still. Clear. She knelt, and saw her own reflection. But not as she was. Younger. Her childhood self. Standing on a beach, this beach, holding a seashell. "You came back," a voice whispered. Not hers. The reflection smiled. And changed. The girl. Her eyes black. Her mouth too wide. Clara jerked back. The pool was gone. Just wet sand. No tide. No gate. But she knew what she had seen. And it wasn't memory. It was invitation. Back at the station, Lydia was waiting outside. She looked normal again. No glassy eyes. No wrong smile. But she said nothing. She simply held out a lantern. "Next time," she said quietly, "take this. She prefers the old light." Clara took it. Not sure if it was a gift or a warning. Maybe both. Clara examined the lantern in her room, turning it over in her hands. Brass handle, thick glass, and a wick long since dried. It smelled of salt and oil and something older, damp, metallic. She lit it using a long match, surprised when the flame caught immediately, burning with a soft, golden hue. The glow didn't behave like normal fire. It didn't flicker with drafts or dim in response to her breath. It remained steady, watchful. She placed it on the windowsill. Outside, the fog recoiled from it. Just slightly. Enough. At breakfast, Lydia was distant again. She picked at toast but didn't speak. Clara cleared her throat. "Did you know I came here as a child?" Lydia's hand paused midair. "No. You didn't mention that." Clara nodded slowly. "I don't remember it clearly. Just flashes. A shell. A girl. A voice. Fog plays tricks," Lydia said. "I don't think it's the fog. I think it's her." Lydia looked up. "You should leave," she said. "I'm not going to." "Then be careful what you remember. Some things weren't meant to return." That afternoon, Clara carried the lantern back to the beach. The sky had turned gunmetal gray, and the sea swelled sluggishly against the rocks. Lanternfall was waiting. She stepped past the spiral-marked pillars again, into the center of the beach. The fog followed this time, but it clung to the edges of the ring, watching, almost respectful. She lit the lantern and held it high. The wind shifted. The sea pulled back, revealing stairs. Not natural ones, carved barnacle-covered stone descending into a crevice between two large rocks. She hesitated only a moment before descending. The air grew colder with every step. Moist. The walls narrowed. The sound of waves faded entirely. And then the tunnel opened into a chamber, one deep beneath the shore, impossible in scale. The ceiling arched with salt-etched stone. Carvings covered every surface, spirals, jellyfish, eyes, more spirals. A shrine of some kind. And at its center, water. A pool, like the one she'd seen in her dream. Glass still. Black. perfectly round. The lantern flickered for the first time. She stepped forward. The surface shimmered. A face formed. Not hers. Hers, and not hers. A version of herself aged beyond years. Eyes hollow. Mouth moving, whispering something inaudible. Then the pool spoke. Not the reflection. The water itself. You remember now. Clara fell to her knees. What am I remembering? The pool pulsed. You were here before. You promised to return. You forgot. She didn't. Who is she? Your echo. Your shadow. The voice you left behind. The reflection shifted to the girl, standing inside the pool, smiling, eyes wide. She reached toward Clara's reflection and whispered, "Let's finish the story." Clara backed away, lantern raised, heart racing. The pool went still, but the fog beyond the tunnel began to move again, curling inward, encroaching, calling her back, not just to the surface, but home. Clara didn't tell Lydia about the tunnel, or the shrine, or the reflection that spoke with her voice. She returned from Lanternfall with the lantern in her hand and seawater soaking the hems of her jeans, and Lydia didn't ask a single question. She only looked once at the lantern and gave a small, pained nod. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. Her window fogged from the outside, and the chill in the air didn't come from the weather. She felt it in her bones. Let's finish the story. The girl's words echoed with a peculiar weight. They weren't just ghostly. They were familiar. Clara sat up in bed, her breath visible in the dark. There was something else, another place she hadn't searched yet. The archive room. The station had a records room in the West Wing, mostly charts, weather logs, and old shipping manifests. But there was a locked filing cabinet at the back, always ignored, always labeled Defunct 1913, in fading tape. She'd passed it every day for weeks. Now she picked the lock. The top drawer groaned open, revealing neatly labeled folders. Incident Report, March 1913. Selcroft Children's Observation Log. Lighthouse Keeper Daniel's Final Notes. Her hands trembled as she opened the incident report. During a storm surge on March 18, 1913, subject Evelyn C., age 10, vanished from observation despite proximity protocols. Witnesses report she was last seen near the lighthouse, though some logs dispute time of day. Clara blinked. Evelyn. The name tugged something loose. She opened the children's observation log. Clara's name wasn't there. Until the final page. Note: Clara A. displayed acute sensitivity to marine patterns. Reported hearing songs in the mist. Voluntarily entered Lanternfall site perimeter. There it was. A record of her. She had been here. The log dated it, April 1998. She was 8 years old. Clara sat back, numb. She remembered the beach now. The tide pools. The lullaby hummed through a conch shell. A girl standing beside her, dark-haired, barefoot, quiet. They had made a promise. A game. One would hide. The other would seek. But Clara had been taken away before it could finish. Her mother, a visiting researcher, had cut the trip short after Clara fell ill. And the girl had been left behind. Evelyn. In the hallway, a shadow moved. Clara stepped out of the records room. At the far end stood the girl. Evelyn. Not quite smiling. Just watching. And this time, when she turned to leave, she didn't vanish. She waited. Clara followed her through the quiet, sleeping station. Down the south wing. Into the basement door. A room she'd never seen before. The walls were covered in mirrors. Old, warped, salt-flecked. Each one reflected something different. Some her, some not. Some showed a child in her place. Some showed the sea, even though there were no windows. Evelyn stood in the center. She lifted one hand and pointed at the largest mirror. It showed Lanternfall, the shrine. But no reflection. Only a staircase descending even deeper. Clara stepped toward it. And the glass rippled. Then Evelyn spoke, her voice no longer a whisper. "Come finish the game." The mirror's surface shimmered like water, its pull undeniable. Clara reached forward instinctively, her palm hovering just a breath from the glass. Behind her, Evelyn stood still, silent, patient. Waiting. Clara's fingertips touched the mirror. It wasn't solid. It gave. She gasped as the surface rippled outward in concentric circles, like a pebble dropped into still water. Before she could pull back, the mirror drew her in with a soundless rush, the world tilting into gray. She stumbled into damp stone. Not her reflection. Not a trick. A corridor. Real. The air was heavy with salt and old things, dust, decay, and something else that was familiar in the most ancient part of her mind. The walls curved slightly, organic in structure, etched with spirals and symbols. Some of them glowed faintly. Clara turned, expecting to see the mirror behind her. There was only rock. No exit. Only forward. The tunnel wound downward like a corkscrew. She held the lantern in one hand, its flame still steady despite the airless depth. Occasionally she passed doorways, open arches that led to alcoves carved into the stone. Some held statues, some pools, and one. A child's room. Clara stopped, her breath catching. A tiny bed. A small wooden chair. A doll slumped over a shelf, one eye missing. She knew this room. Not just recognized it, knew it. From the dream. From childhood. From Evelyn. A memory returned like a cold wave. They had played here once. Clara and Evelyn. Both children, both curious. Both drawn to the sea, and the fog, and the way the whispers curled around them like lullabies. Evelyn had told her secrets. Said the ocean remembered everyone who listened long enough. Said the fog was not weather, but a soul stretched too thin. And Clara had laughed, tossed shells, chased light. Until Evelyn asked her to stay forever. At the end of the tunnel, stairs descended into a vast, circular chamber. Larger than the lighthouse, larger than any space could possibly be beneath the cliff. In its center stood the pool again. Deeper this time. Blacker. Surrounded by standing stones and those same ancient spirals. Clara stepped to the edge. The lantern flickered. In the water, a face appeared. Evelyn's. But older. Like her age had continued even as time above had stopped. She smiled faintly. "You came back." Clara knelt beside the water, heart racing. "What is this place?" "The place beneath forgetting." Evelyn's voice came from the pool, not from the image. "You left. I waited. The fog helped me remember. But it's not enough. You have to remember too. All of it. So we can finish the story. I'm not a child anymore. But you were. And that part of you stayed." Clara stared into the water, her own face barely visible. "What happens if I do?" "You become whole. Or you drown. That's the choice." The lantern's flame dimmed. In the chamber above, Clara heard something. The sound of many voices. Children. Laughing. Calling. "Clara! Come play! It's your turn!" She backed away from the pool, her breath trembling. This wasn't memory. It was a trap. Or a promise. She couldn't tell which. From behind her, Evelyn's real voice, soft, nearly human, spoke once more. "You promised." Clara didn't answer Evelyn. She couldn't. Every part of her wanted to scream, to run, to deny what she was hearing. But the deeper part, the buried child who once laughed on this very beach, whispered back from inside her. "We did promise." Clara stood at the edge of the pool, the lantern in her hand casting long shadows against the ancient stones. Evelyn's reflection hovered beneath the surface, waiting. The laughter from the tunnel above faded, replaced by a silence too full, like the world holding its breath. "I need to understand," Clara said finally, her voice echoing against the cavern walls. Evelyn's eyes glimmered. "You already do. Then explain it anyway." The water rippled around her reflection. When Evelyn answered, Her voice was no longer that of a child. It was older, layered with others, as though more than one soul spoke at once. We were chosen. Two halves. One who leaves. One who stays. You went back. You forgot. But the sea doesn't. The fog doesn't. I couldn't. Clara's knees trembled. Why me? Because you listened. That word again. Listened. She thought back, years of being drawn to the ocean, to the feel of the wind over water, to the rhythm of tides like a distant pulse in her blood. A strange peace she'd never explained. A grief she didn't understand. You've been calling me? We called each other. The promise bound us. The fog carried it. It holds everything that's ever been whispered. Evelyn's face swam closer, clearer. You weren't meant to forget. I was a child, Clara said. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. The voice softened, almost kind. Then remember now. That's all I ask? The lantern dimmed again, but didn't die. Clara stepped forward. The water shimmered, parting slightly, as if welcoming her. Then something stirred below. A shape. Large. Not Evelyn. Not a child. Something older. Ancient. She stepped back, pulse racing. What else is down there? Evelyn's voice didn't answer. But another did. A voice like rushing tide, full of memory and cold. The ones who never left. The voices forgotten. The rest of you. And Clara understood. The fog wasn't a curse. It was a collection. Of moments. Regrets. Promises. All the pieces of people that had been whispered away. She turned, fleeing up the spiral tunnel, the echo of voices chasing her like rising waves. Laughter. Cries. Names. Her name. Her mother's. Lydia's. The keeper's. Myers. She burst from the chamber into the mirror hallway, but something was wrong. The mirrors no longer reflected her. They reflected her absence. In each one, she wasn't there. The hallway darkened. The mirrors began to crack. And Evelyn's voice followed, softer now, like a child again. You don't have to run. We can remember together. Clara stumbled into the station hall and slammed the basement door behind her. She collapsed against it, breath ragged, heart pounding. Outside, the fog clung tighter than ever. And in the distance, beneath the groan of the sea, a second foghorn blew. Not from any ship, but from beneath. The door groaned under Clara's weight, the wood damp and strangely warm. She stared at her hands. They were shaking, not just from fear, but from the pull. She could still hear Evelyn's voice. Not in her ears. Inside her. Calling softly. Like a lullaby buried beneath the surf. She needed answers. Real ones. Not memories. Not ghosts. Lydia. Clara found her on the back porch of the station, sitting in her usual chair, a mug steaming between her palms. The fog was so thick it clung to Lydia's hair in droplets. She stared into the gray with a stillness that felt ancient. I found her, Clara said quietly. Lydia didn't look at her. Just said, I know. I found the shrine. The mirror. The stairwell under the water. Clara's voice cracked. She says I made a promise. Lydia exhaled, long and slow. You did. That stopped her. You knew? I saw your name in the observation logs years ago. Before you arrived. Before you even applied. Lydia turned now. Her face looked tired, hollowed. When you wrote for the assignment, I thought maybe it would stay quiet. That it had forgotten. It? Lydia's voice grew soft. The memory beneath the sea. The fog is just how it breathes. Clara paced, trying to make sense of it. But why me? What am I to her? You're the one who left, Lydia said. You were the first to hear her and survive. The others didn't understand the difference between hearing and listening. Clara frowned. Evelyn, she's not alone down there. No. She never was. Lydia stood, moving slowly, like each joint resisted the decision. "There's something you need to see," she said. She led Clara past the main lab, through a hall she had never entered, locked behind a door with a metal tag that read, "Observer's Wing." Inside, a room filled with screens. Old monitors, flickering CRTs, analog dials, and dozens of tapes. Recordings. Audio logs. Most labeled with names and dates, most long before Clara's time. One of the monitors crackled to life. Grainy footage. Black and white. A girl. Sitting in the hallway. Evelyn. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was whispering to the wall. Then she stopped, and looked directly at the lens. Directly at Clara. Though the video was over 20 years old. And she said, "Don't run next time." Lydia shut the screen off. "She appears to anyone who listens long enough. You, me, Meyer, even the keeper. But you're different. She knows you. You're the mirror that left." Clara swallowed hard. "She wants me to come back. Fully. To finish something. To merge," Lydia said. "To become one again." Clara froze. "You mean, she wants to replace me?" "No," Lydia said. "She wants to join you. There's a difference. But the question is..." She looked at Clara, eyes serious and sad. "Will you still be you when she does?" Outside, the foghorn blew once. Then again. Then a third time, long and low. And from deep beneath the station, something answered. That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat in the lab with the lantern on the table beside her, its flame unnaturally steady. Evelyn's whispers danced just at the edge of her hearing, no matter how much she tried to block them out with static, recordings, white noise, nothing worked. The fog had grown so dense that even the lighthouse beacon, when she checked it from the south wing window, barely pierced it. Its sweep was choked off after a few meters swallowed whole. The sea wasn't groaning anymore. It was waiting. At dawn, or what passed for dawn in this endless gray, Clara stood on the path to Lanternfall, the lantern in one hand, a recording device in the other, and a journal strapped to her chest. Lydia met her at the edge of the trees. "You're going back," she said quietly. Clara nodded. "I need to finish it. Understand it. You don't come back from this unchanged." "I already haven't." Lydia hesitated, then held something out, a smooth stone, worn flat. Spiral etched into its face. "It's from the shrine. Meyer left it on my desk before he vanished. I never figured out why." Clara took it. "It was warm. If you see him," Lydia said, "tell him he was right." The descent into Lanternfall felt different now. The fog didn't resist her this time. It parted around her like a tide, revealing the beach and the ruins with unnerving clarity. The stone pillars gleamed with moisture, symbols glowing faintly like bioluminescent creatures in deep water. The stairs were already visible, descending into the stone crevice. She followed. This time, Evelyn was waiting at the bottom. Not in the water. In the chamber. Real. Tangible. She looked older. Not in years, but in weight. In presence. Her hair draped down her back in thick, wet cords. Her eyes were hollow but not empty. "You're ready now," she said. Clara gripped the lantern tighter. "What happens if I say no?" Evelyn's mouth twitched in a soft smile. "You already said yes. You just forgot." The pool behind her shimmered again, showing scenes instead of reflections. Clara's childhood. Playing with shells. Drawing spirals in the sand. Whispering promises into the mist. A version of her she barely remembered. "You split," Evelyn said. "Half of you stayed here. Half went back. That's why you've never felt whole." Clara whispered. "I didn't know what I was doing." "You don't have to. The sea never asks permission. It just takes what you leave behind." Clara stepped toward the pool. And the chamber changed. The stone walls rippled. Spirals spun slowly. The air grew thick, heavy with memory. The fog had made its way inside, swirling above the pool like a crown. Voices rose again, distant and echoing. Clara, do you remember us? Don't forget. She turned to Evelyn. What are they? Evelyn touched her hand, warm, human. They're the rest of us. Everyone who listened. Everyone who left parts behind. And what happens to me? You choose. You take your peace back. Or you stay. You become you. All of you. Clara stepped to the edge of the pool. Saw her own reflection. Then Evelyn's. Then both together. The spiral stone in her pocket burned with heat. The lantern flickered. The fog breathed in. Clara stood at the edge of the pool, her breath shallow, her mind teetering at the edge of something enormous. The voices around her didn't grow louder, they grew closer, as though they pressed in from the walls, the water, the stone itself. All whispering the same question. Do you remember? The pool's surface shimmered again. Not just with Evelyn's face, but now with her own, blended. The eyes weren't hers alone. The mouth wore two expressions at once, fear and peace. She reached for the spiral stone in her coat and held it out toward the pool. The water glowed where it touched the light. Evelyn stepped beside her. Are you ready? She asked. I don't know. That's the right answer. Then Evelyn knelt beside the pool and placed her palm to the surface. The water opened. Not like a splash, not violently. It parted. A stairway of sorts, made from shimmering, translucent stone, wound downward into the dark. The fog followed, streaming slowly in strands like memory made visible. Clara stared down into it. I can't breathe down there, she said. You don't need to, Evelyn whispered. You'll remember how. Step by step, they descended together. Clara's heartbeat slowed. Her breath didn't fog anymore. As they walked, her thoughts began to loosen, not like forgetfulness, but like unpacking. The names of people she hadn't thought of in years filled her mind. The way her father's voice had cracked when he'd read her bedtime stories. The way she used to hum to herself in dark rooms. The memory of Evelyn laughing, real laughter, on that same beach, years ago. She hadn't dreamed it. It had happened. And she had left. At the bottom, they emerged into another chamber. This one was not stone. It was bone. A dome formed of pale ribs, organic and endless, curving over a dark sea with no shore. The fog hung low, almost touching the surface. Dozens of figures lined the shore. Not fully people. Not fully shadows. They were the echoes of those who had listened, who had left behind pieces of themselves in the fog and forgotten. And they were watching Clara. Not with anger. With expectation. Evelyn stepped forward into the water. She turned. You came back, she said. Clara moved toward her. I want to remember, she said softly. Not just for me. For you. Evelyn nodded once. She took Clara's hand. And the sea rose. It wasn't drowning. It wasn't falling. It was joining. Her memories unfolded like a map. Her dreams, her childhood, her fears, her forgotten hours spent talking to the waves. Evelyn's voice twined through them, familiar now, not separate. Clara didn't disappear. She became. When she opened her eyes, she was back on the beach. The fog had lifted slightly, revealing the ruins in sharper detail. She stood alone. The lantern was cold in her hand. But she remembered everything. And Evelyn was there, inside her. Not haunting. Holding on. Together. Clara stood motionless on the beach, her boots half buried in the sand, the damp wind tugging at her coat. The fog had thinned, but not vanished. It had retreated just far enough to reveal the outlines of the old ruins, the collapsed gate stones, the steps leading nowhere. And yet, everything had changed. The world had not shifted, but she had. She turned in a slow circle. Her breath came easily now, but it moved strangely in her chest. Slower. Fuller. Every beat of her heart felt matched by a pull from beneath the earth, as though something ancient had been braided into her body. Evelyn was quiet inside her. Not gone. Simply resting. Together they were whole. She walked back up the trail toward the station. The fog didn't resist her. It made way. Almost reverent. Lydia was on the porch again, though this time she stood. Her mug rested untouched on the railing, steam curling upward like fingers. As Clara approached, Lydia said nothing. Her eyes moved over Clara's face, searching for something. Recognition. Maybe fear. I remember now, Clara said. Lydia exhaled through her nose. Then you understand. Clara nodded. She's not trying to hurt anyone. No. But she's not human. Memory never is. It's heavier than people think. Especially when it lingers too long. Clara looked toward the ocean. Why didn't you stop me? Because I couldn't. Lydia gave a faint smile. You were already marked. Since the day you arrived. Maybe since the day you left. Clara lowered herself into the chair beside Lydia. She wants to be remembered. That's all. Yes, Lydia said softly. But memory is a dangerous form of love. Later that evening, Clara returned to the lighthouse. Not as a trespasser. As a keeper. She climbed the spiral staircase, her boots echoing on stone. The dust didn't settle around her anymore. It parted. Accepted. At the top, she cleaned the lantern glass, cleared cobwebs, polished brass. The fog pressed against the windows, but gently, like a cat at the door. She lit the beacon. The old light flickered, then burned steady. And in the distance, through the thin veil of fog, other lights blinked in return. Not from ships. From the sea. That night, Clara dreamed she was standing in a vast black ocean. The water reached only to her knees, but stretched forever. Around her, children played, laughing, calling out, their shapes shimmering like reflections caught in a breeze. One of them ran to her. Evelyn. She grinned and held out a shell. It's your turn. Clara took it. Listened. And smiled. When she awoke, she was humming. The tune from her childhood. The same one Evelyn used to sing when they played together on the beach. Before the promise. Before the forgetting. Before the sea had turned to silence. Now it was full of voices again. Clara resumed her work as though nothing had changed. But everything had. The station felt less like a workplace and more like a threshold now. She catalogued jellyfish blooms, monitored currents, logged fog behavior. But behind every entry was something more, an understanding that this was not just weather. It was memory wearing a mask. Lydia watched her carefully. Respectfully. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with shared knowing. You're different, Lydia said one morning, over tea. I'm more, Clara replied. Lydia tilted her head. How much more? Clara didn't answer. In the following days, strange things began to happen. At first, it was subtle. The recordings Clara made began to contain extra voices. Not the whispering. Those had become familiar, but new ones. Clearer. Older. Speaking in fragments. The tide turned yesterday. She still walks the shore. We didn't forget. We never did. Clara isolated the voices, ran them through filters. No distortion. No interference. Just impossible echoes of people who shouldn't exist anymore. She brought one to Lydia. This sounds like Meyer. Lydia listened, face pale. It is. He's in the fog. No, Lydia whispered. He is the fog now. Clara began hearing knocks in the lighthouse tower at night. Not the wind. Not the structure settling. Knocks in patterns. Rhythms. Like code. She tapped back. One knock for yes. Two for no. Soon, the tapping began to answer her. Sometimes she asked questions aloud. Sometimes only in her mind. Still, the fog replied. One evening, she sat by the lantern, the flame burning gold. Outside, in the mist, 3 lights blinked slowly. Then she heard a voice. From the sea. A child's voice. Not Evelyn's. I remember you. Clara stepped to the window. Who are you? A pause. The first. She checked the logs. There had been drownings here long before Evelyn. Dozens. Some recorded. Some deliberately omitted. Names she didn't recognize. But voices that did. The fog was not just memory. It was archive. A library built of promises and ends. And now, Clara realized, it was growing. Not maliciously, but intentionally. People who had listened, really listened, were becoming part of it. Returning. She opened the station's visitor logs going back 50 years. Half the names were scratched out. Some were marked. Didn't return. Lost to the tide. Left and left behind. She looked at the final entry in Meyer's own hand. One of us must stay to remember. One must go to bring them back. And beneath that, when she returns, the gate will open again. Clara's hand trembled. The gate. She remembered now. It wasn't a gate to keep people out. It was built to keep the fog in. And the spiral stone Lydia gave her? It was a key. That night, Clara returned to Lanternfall. This time, the fog didn't follow her, it led her. The path was clearer than it had ever been, not in the way of absence, but invitation. The stone pillars on the shore glowed faintly, as if lit from within. The spirals etched into their faces pulsed in rhythm with Clara's heartbeat. She stepped into the circle of stones. The sea was at low tide. The pool in the sand had returned. Not the one from memory, but deeper. Carved. Waiting. Clara knelt beside it, the spiral stone gripped in her hand. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The pool responded to her presence. Water swirled into movement, forming letters, not spoken words, but symbols, layered meanings. One spiral. Two spirals. A mirrored loop. Clara placed the stone in the center of the pool. The ground vibrated. A sound like breath, like exhalation, moved through the stones. The sea parted. Just enough. Where the surf should have met sand, a staircase descended again. But this one was new. No algae. Nowhere. Just dark, slick stone etched in a spiral so long and gradual it was nearly a circle. And at the bottom, the gate. It had always been here. She knew that now. This wasn't the first time someone had found it. It had been uncovered by lighthouse keepers, researchers, fishermen. Each of them had heard the voices. Some had tried to close it. Others to open it. None had understood it. Until her. The gate was a single slab, towering above her, flanked by twisted coral columns and stone rings. Across its surface was etched every name she'd heard in the fog. Including her own. Including Evelyn's. And just beneath their names. Two must become one. One must return. One must remain. Clara placed her palm on the stone. It warmed. And the voices came, not as whispers, but as song. Hundreds of them. Harmonizing. Calling to her. Not from the fog, but from within it. Evelyn stirred inside her. "This is it," she said. "Are we ready?" Clara whispered. "We've always been ready." The gate pulsed, then opened. Not with hinges or cracks. It dissolved, revealing a passage through the sea, not wet, but memory-made. A path of light and echo. A corridor of forgotten names and broken promises stitched back together by something impossibly old. Clara stepped inside. Not alone. Not afraid. And behind her, the fog followed. The gate closed behind her without a sound. The passage wasn't a tunnel, but a timeline, shimmering threads of memory suspended in liquid dusk. Clara walked among them, each step echoing with half-familiar moments. A child's cry from the shore, her father's voice reading poetry, the first time she touched a jellyfish and didn't flinch. Each memory glowed faintly. Each belonged to someone who had listened. The air, if it was air at all, shimmered with fog, not heavy, but gentle now, like a mist inside her lungs, not choking but filling. Clarifying. Welcoming. She was not drowning. She was integrating. Evelyn walked beside her. Or rather, Evelyn's presence did. They didn't speak with words anymore. They shared. One memory for another. One fear, one laughter, one forgotten afternoon for a breathless moment of silence inside a cold lighthouse. And when they reached the end of the passage, Clara understood. The fog had never taken anyone. They had given themselves to it. To be remembered. To become part of something larger, softer, sadder, older than human grief. At the end of the corridor was a platform of obsidian stone, suspended over a sea without stars. And on it, a chair. Not a throne. A keeper's chair. Like the one in the lighthouse. Waiting. Clara stepped forward. As she did, she felt them, the others, arrive. Meyer. The old lighthouse keeper. The children. The quiet-hearted, the lost, the ones who had listened when no one else would. They stood in the fog with her now. Silent. And grateful. She turned slowly and sat. The chair sighed as it took her weight, not just her body, but her being. Above, a soft light rose. The fog pulsed once, then stilled. Back on the shore, Lydia stood beneath the lighthouse. She looked toward Lanternfall, though no light pierced the mist. Still, she smiled. She stayed, she said softly. And from the sea came a single echo. Remember me. 1 year later. The fog still rolls into Lanternfall, but never the same way twice. Ships steer clear, yet stories drift into port towns like seabirds. Whispers of strange lights, voices in the tide, laughter at night. The lighthouse still glows. Faint. Constant. Some say it's haunted. Others say it's a sanctuary. But every now and then, a soul who's lost, weary, or broken will come to the cliffs. And they'll listen. And if they stay long enough, they'll hear her voice. Calm. Patient. Eternal. Welcome, listener. I remember you. The end.